all that are listening to this Hangout live or maybe later on to the recording. Danielle, I'm here today together with Henrico. We will say a little bit about the last problem or the last assignment in this course that is early next week. And I think I'll ask Henrico to reflect a bit on the differences between PBL courses and curricula and more traditional ones. We have a question from Fatima that I will try to answer, and we might have time for a lot of other questions if people have them. And if we have time in the end, we might say something about this Mooc and PBL and to what extent this Mooc might be seen as problem-based learning, maybe not. Start with the first point. If we think of this Mooc, and the last assignment is the only one in this Mooc that is an individual assignment. Well, as you've seen, we've asked you to do a brainstorm, a pre-discussion about this problem in your group, and then to hand in a short individual reflection of what you are taking away from this course. And those could be lessons learned. We would also really love to see how you think that you might apply some of the things that you've learned to your own context, or why that is not possible. And some of you might want to focus on that. Others might have more ideas about maybe innovations in problem-based learning or innovations in learning in general. All of that is fine. The individual reflection is a very open assignment in terms of content and also in terms of format. So we'd invite you to do your reflection in any way that you want. It could be text, it could be video, it could be a drawing, or whatever you would like to make of it. Just one small issue. This assignment is the last one in this course. We will assign a certificate of participation to everyone that has handed in all the assignments and answered the final questionnaire. Now, some of you have joined a group a little bit late, and that might have prevented you from participating in the first one or two assignments of that group, and therefore you might not have credit for those. We can manually correct that, but please contact me if that is the case for you, and then I'll ask our NovoEd help desk contact to correct this. Herco, can I ask you to reflect a little bit on what is typical for PBL courses or curricula?
Yes. Well, where to begin? What is typical? I think we should begin with the students, because for me, that is the most obvious difference between working in a PBL university and in a traditional university, because you really notice that students are trained to engage in discussion in small groups. So I would say that they acquire these PBL competences and they show when you engage with these students. Of course, they're not born that way, so it's something that you need to pay attention to when you start PBL, that you start preparing the students to engage in these different roles. They're not sitting in the lecture hall taking in knowledge, but they have to learn to lead a discussion, to be a scribe, to give feedback, etc. I think it's also typical in PBL curricula that we give students voice in what's happening. So we often engage them when we prepare educational materials. So I think, let's start with the students. And the second thing, of course, the teachers, because it requires different skills to be not just a lecturer, but also capable of supervising a tutorial group. So teachers should be trained as well. And teachers should also learn to collaborate with people from different disciplines. Ideally, if we have problems that are authentic, then often multiple disciplines are involved, and that means that the teachers should want to or learn to want to collaborate, and that's not a simple thing. I mean, that's probably the thing that makes maintenance of PBL a difficult issue, because if you're a teacher and you're really stuck on your topic, then it is very easy to make that topic the most important thing that's happening in a course, and before you know it, it becomes a monodisciplinary introduction in some kind of topic that and anything that's makes problem interesting can disappear. What else is different? Well, the infrastructure, of course. If you have a building where you only have large lecture halls, it's difficult to implement PBL. There are people who think you could try to implement PBL just in small doses, so then you have a traditional system next to a PBL system. But that is, of course, you don't have the benefits of full-scale PBL, because you need the infrastructure anyway, and then you'd have teachers who are trained traditionally, teachers who are trained in PBL, and it's very difficult to get them to work together because there are these different educational formats. So ideally, you would have a university where PBL is introduced in every faculty, because then, for instance, you could have interdisciplinary problems. You could ask someone from law or a business and to help out with designing a problem in medicine, for instance. And for that to happen, I think in PBL universities, you tend to see a bit stronger central management to make sure that people can learn from what's happening in different places. So yeah, that's my 2 cents worth of differences between PBL and traditional curricula. Thank you.
Thanks. There's some of those things struck me, because you said teachers need to be trained to be PBL tutors. I know that I'm a teacher who very much prefers tutoring over lecturing. I'm very bad at giving lectures, and I love tutoring. And I think there are more people like me. So sometimes I'm not sure this is true for all the teachers. I've seen in the discussion forum, I think that there are quite some people also interested in how you do the transition from a normal curriculum to a PBL curriculum. And I had to think of that question when I heard you say about it's nice if the whole university has problem-based learning, because Maastricht University was lucky in that sense that we started up with PBL from the beginning, but that's not the case in many other situations. That might be more complicated, although it also might give chances. I've seen that even in secondary schools where learning is very much teacher-centered, when they start, teachers really, really enjoy doing something like problem-based learning, even if it's only for 3 or 4 lessons or for 1 month. And then they go back to what they did before. When you ask them afterwards, they say it was great and I'm going to do that more. So maybe it is possible to do a more gradual transition, but it can also be confusing for teachers to juggle around different teaching formats at the same time in one curriculum. I agree. To what extent do you think this Mooc is problem-based learning, Herco?
Well, I think the people in the groups are best placed to answer that. But if they have a feeling that that they are collaboratively solving a problem and learning from one another, then well, I think we're on our way to implementing PBL in a Mooc. But it's really depending on, for instance, whether the problems are triggering the kind of group learning that we wanted to trigger. We don't have tutors here who can supervise and kind of ask stimulating questions to help people find the next ways to move through everything that has been written or collected. So in that sense, it's not PBL. There is no tutor, but I think that the problems lend themselves to interesting discussion, and based on what I see in the assignments, at least, there are quite a few groups that are really doing a lot of interesting work, and I think you should ask your group members whether or not you've learned from one another, and then based on that, I'd say yes, it's PBL. But I can't answer it.
Yeah, it was a bit mean of me to ask you that question, of course. When we wanted to engage in a Mooc about problem-based learning as a design team, we thought that we couldn't go back to a really old-fashioned teacher-centered format. But of course, we also can't do problem-based learning in the way that we do it face-to-face. And this Mooc is what we came up with, what was feasible in a Mooc, and whether or not it is problem-based learning, to me personally, doesn't also really matter. I think it's very similar to problem-based learning. It's intended to give you an impression of what problem-based learning can be like. It differs from face-to-face versions, not only because there's no tutor, but also because the groups in this Mooc can also intend to learn very different things. And when PBL is in a curriculum, we have far more focused goals, learning goals, I think, often. In some of the groups, I also see discussions about what is the difference between problem-based learning and project-based learning and team-based learning and case-based learning, and all those formats that are partly overlapping and partly not. We've had those discussions as well, I think, and we tend to come to a conclusion that it doesn't really matter what name you give something if it works for you, which is maybe a too pragmatic an approach, but it suits me best. If you have any opinions or comments on whether what you do in this Mooc is problem-based learning or not, we'd love to see some of those in your reflections as well, of course. I was going to try to ask Fatima's question here, because I see that you've asked us how long the Mooc will be open and how long the materials will be available. You're not the only one. I've seen that question in the discussion forum as well. What we'll do is that we'll keep the Mooc open for at least a number of weeks after the formal closing date. Whether it will be 6 weeks or 5 weeks, or I can't exactly say. We'll have to decide on a final day, but it will be staying open for a few weeks after the formal end, for people who want to show things to their colleagues, but also for groups that might be working with a little bit of a delay, which is also fine, because all the deadlines in the Mooc are soft deadlines. At a certain moment, we will start issuing the certificates of participation, but we'll also let you know about that. Fatima, did you have any other questions? Or other people, maybe?
No, I have no other questions.
No? How are you experiencing the Mooc so far?
It's been very interesting being a student in PBL. I've only been a tutor in PBL, so it's been quite interesting being the student and having to go through the 7 charm steps. So now I'm more empathic towards my students when they are anxious, when they're going to do the research and they don't completely understand. So it's been a quite interesting process to be the student in a more PBL sort of module.
You using PBL with your own students then?
Maastricht University and the University of Venda has been collaborating for a number of years. So our school uses PBL, but the difficulty for me is that I wasn't in the beginning phase, so I'm not sure about how do you structure a problem, how do you design the actual course. So it's been quite interesting going through the readings and finding these resources, because when I asked some of my colleagues, they didn't know. So I'm finding it useful because my colleague and I, we need to design a community psychology PBL module. So the resources have been quite useful.
So I hope you will indeed be able to use some of the things that you've learned. And I think what you reflect is what we all have when we start as a PBL tutor in a new organization, that you're not really sure how this works and you're not really sure whether it will work. Many people are quite skeptic at the beginning. Will it work? Will my students not be lazy and go home and do nothing? So I can imagine it's quite a big step. Yeah. I don't see any other. Herke, is there anything that you would like to add?
No, except that the community psychology is a wonderful topic for a PBL course, but that's something else entirely.
You might notice that Herke works in psychology as well. And this is a topic close to his heart, I think. Well, if there's nothing else that anybody would like to ask or add, then I'm going to close this session with the last thing, and that is that next week is the last week. We have 2 more Hangout sessions next week. We will have quite a lot of time to answer any remaining questions that you may have. Maybe there are learning questions or issues that you haven't been able to answer in this MOOC and that you would like us to say something about. If so, then please join us and ask these questions or post them on the discussion fora or to us personally in the MOOC, and we'll try to answer. Thank you all for being present. Bye-bye.
Bye.